So let's talk about IVF and
Yeah,
the recent Alabama Supreme Court ruling on frozen embryos. I want to
yeah.
get your take on this. Can you tell us, first of all, a little bit about what is the Catholic position here on
Yeah.
IVF, perhaps why we hold to what we hold, and then weigh in on that ruling for us?
Yeah, so in vitro IVF, in vitro fertilization, is the process of creating a human embryo outside of the mother's body, typically by extracting egg, extracting sperm, and then they are fertilized in a petri dish. The
Hmm.
embryos that are created, some of them are implanted back a woman's womb or a surrogate's womb. The others are either frozen in cryopreservation or they are destroyed, killed. So the church teaches that IVF is sinful, partly because of the destruction of human embryos, but primarily because it is a disordered creation of human life. That the church teaches that human beings have the right to be the fruit of the marital act between husband and wife. So a child's right to come into existence through the marital act is violated when they come into existence through the manipulations of a laboratory technician.
Hmm.
So the church teaches that it is wrong, and this goes to that distinction I made earlier. This is not an infallible teaching of the church because it's a relatively new technology. It came about in the 1970s, but since it has come about, the church has consistently and clearly taught against it. So it requires the religious submission of mind and will. One has to accept it. You can't engage in IVF. You could personally struggle with this teaching, but you could not publicly oppose it, for example. But that is what the church teaches. I would say church teaches on the matter.
Yeah. Now, weigh in on the Alabama Supreme Court ruling. First of all, tell us a little bit what happened and
Yeah.
how we understand it as Catholics.
This is a really interesting case because if you heard about it, a lot of people think, oh, those Bible fundies in Alabama, the state Supreme Court just wanted to get rid of IVF because they're radical Christians. And I think many of the members of the state Supreme Court are Christian, but the case was not about people trying to ban in vitro fertilization.
Mhm.
The case is really interesting because it shows you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Mhm.
What was going on was that a group of parents, they created these human embryos, these human beings, and somebody walked into the IVF center in 2020, and there's just like a patient wandered into the embryo storage room, picked up a vial of human embryos, and because they're very cold from the cryopreservation, dropped them because it burned their hand and destroyed the embryos in the process. So the parents of those embryos sued the IVF laboratory facility for wrongful death of human beings because the parents viewed these embryos as human beings. They're human beings. The IVF facility viewed them as human beings because you're not going to implant non-human beings into women.
Right.
And the parents sued just as you would sue a daycare if somebody just wandered into a daycare and negligently caused the death of like 4 toddlers. Well, you'd sue. The daycare should be set up so that doesn't happen. And
Mhm.
they were suing so that embryos shouldn't be destroyed. It shouldn't have loss of life like this. So they're suing for wrongful death. And the Alabama State Supreme Court says, well, when you look at how embryos are treated in Alabama law, how they're currently treated now in light of Dobbs, they are human beings. So IVF centers can be sued for the wrongful death of these embryos. And now IVF centers are shutting down. They're saying, well, we don't want to take on that kind of legal liability. And I would say, well, sorry, you're trafficking in human beings. That's sort of how it goes. And I would say that I would say here, look, it just shows you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't treat these embryos as human beings when you want them, like to
Mhm.
sue when they're negligently killed, but then discard them and purposely kill them when you feel like that they're not high quality enough to be implanted, so to speak. So I think it really does expose a double standard within how human embryos are viewed in the IVF process.
Is there also a double standard here with abortion?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because you have so-called conservatives who will say IVF is great. We need to keep this, and they don't protest in vitro fertilization because they see, oh, well, what could be wrong with it? I mean, it creates life. Abortion destroys life. And I would say to those people, at the very least, look, human embryos are killed in this process, so they're almost always going to be. And number two, even if they aren't, if you are pro-life, you can't human beings have more rights before birth than just the right to life. They
Mm,
have the right to not be poisoned in the womb through alcohol poisoning.
mhm,
I would say, as I said before, humans have the right to reside in their mother's womb.
mhm.
I would say it would be wrong if we invented artificial wombs, for example. I would say it would be wrong to use those electively. So, you find out you're pregnant, and you know what? I just don't want to. I don't want to go through pregnancy. That's just too much of a hassle. So I'm just going to go to the doctor. He's going to put the baby in the womb, and then I'll come back in 9 months and get him. Uh, if that were to ever happen, the church doesn't have a teaching on this because this doesn't happen yet. But if that happened, let's say 50 years from now, I'm quite positive the church would say that that's wrong if it's done electively. Now, if it's done because, the baby's in danger, the pregnancy's gone awry, this is the only way to save the baby's life, then it might be allowed. But we would say, no, a child has the right to reside in his mother's body and the right to come into existence through the marital act. So if you're pro-life, if you're pro-life and you're only against abortion, I would want you to meditate more, contemplate, reflect, discern more about the other rights that human beings have before birth beyond just the right to life.
Yeah, that's helpful. Now, did you hear Biden's comments specifically about IVF and the Alabama ruling? He was asked about, well, what do you think then about the Catholic understanding of IVF? And he just kind of flippantly said, I don't believe that, and just walked off. But what do you think of that? Somebody who identifies as a Catholic just flippantly rejecting Catholic teaching.
Well, who knows what Biden identifies as nowadays, or what he's thinking about. I am not expecting. I don't expect most regular people to carefully reflect upon the church's bioethical teaching. I really am going to put it past President Biden where he is at, given public comments and what he says about things, providing careful reflection on these important bioethical issues. I think he takes the same view that uh, the Catholics have been taking, the pro-choice Catholics in politics, the Kennedys have been taking for a long time, of just saying, I'm personally pro-life, but I'm not going to impose that on others. So the law should have nothing to do with it. Though I think he would say the church is probably just wrong on IVF
It
and
sounds
just
like he's
have
saying
that.
it's wrong.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure he would. But there's a lot of Catholics who would say the same thing
yeah,
because they only see the positive outcome. They say, well, look at this child created through IVF. How can you say IVF is wrong when this beautiful child exists? You say, well, yeah, the child is a good thing,
yeah, yeah.
but it doesn't mean that everything that brings a child into existence is good. There are, children come into existence through fornication, through adultery, through
Right,
prostitution, but it does not follow that those things are good. You look in
right.
scripture, children came into existence through concubinage and polygamy. Important people in the history of the faith of salvation history. It doesn't mean it was right to bring them into existence in that way, but God writes straight with crooked lines.
Right. Yeah. That's very helpful. Now, speaking of Biden and his comments,
Yeah.
I was fascinated by his reproductive freedom comments that he made during the State of the Union address. I want to get your thoughts on that. What did you think whenever he went down that route?
Oh, what did he say exactly?
Well, he was just really pushing for abortion. And of
Yeah.
course, he brings up the case of rape, right?
Yeah.
That's always what's brought up to
Well,
kind of justify this stuff.
yes, and I think that it is interesting here. As I feel like pro-lifers, we're on the defensive now. We've made tremendous gains. I
Mhm,
mean, Dobbs versus Jackson was like getting 90 yards
mhm.
in a football game. Of course, the other side is going to fight back hard. I mean, when you punch the bear in the nose, the bear isn't just going to roll over. So we've had legislative victories here in Texas, here in Georgia. We've had defeats primarily at ballot initiatives. So I think that Biden he's able to campaign on abortion well because pro-choicers now have something to fight for. They're now sort of the
Yeah,
underdogs trying to fight back. And I remember before Dobbs, pro-choicers never wanted to debate the issue or talk about it publicly because they're like, well, we won. Why
yeah,
what do we have to gain? But now they're the underdogs who are fighting back, and so he's going to be more vigorous in that regard. And yeah, it's an absolute scandal. And especially for me, that if you put the shoe on the other foot, if you had a Catholic president who was saying that ranchers on the southern border should have the freedom to use lethal force against illegal immigrants who are merely trespassing. That
Hmm.
if they see an illegal immigrant on their land, they should have the right to shoot them on sight. And he's just saying that they should have the right to be able to do that. I mean, just imagine the Catholic left would be apoplectic, and well, any Catholic of good conscience should be apoplectic.
Yeah, yeah,
But they would say, how could a Catholic say something like that? And if they said, well, yeah, I know the church teaches it's wrong to kill illegal immigrants for trespassing, but I can't impose my faith on these ranchers. And look at their lands are being destroyed, their livelihoods. Something's got to give. Like, what about the difficult situation? Nobody, the people on the
yeah.
other side would not tolerate that. And so I would ask them just to take a step back, see that the unborn are human beings, and just try to act accordingly for once in your life.
That's a good point. Now, do you think that the overturning of Roe v. Wade is long term going to be more harmful than helpful, or overall it's still just going to be um, more helpful than harmful?
I think overall it's more helpful because I would say, yeah, we are suffering defeats, especially at the ballot box. But at the same time, there have been less abortions. Children's lives have been saved.
Mm.
We're at least on a workable path to pass incremental legislation and create areas of the country where you just don't have abortion anymore. Like I still think, yeah, abortion's not offered here in Texas. So uh, as time passes on, you'll have generations that grow up saying, oh yeah, well, we just don't have abortion here. It hasn't been legal as long as I've been alive, for
Mm.
example. And that'd be, for the next 20, 25 years, hopefully we'll have areas where that becomes the norm. And of course, there's going to be areas where it's much more vociferously defended. I do think it's been more helpful because honestly, what would be worse, right? Like how could we get any worse than what we had before, which was abortion is legal in all 50 states for any reason through all 9 months of pregnancy. It wasn't
Mm.
available. You didn't have late term abortion in every state because you just didn't
Mhm.
have providers in every state willing to do something so ghastly.
Yeah.
But it was certainly legal. Uh, and so the only thing that could be worse is if we went back to that and somehow the government federally funded and every abortion was free or something like that. And I don't see the pendulum swinging that far back in that direction. I think overall it was good, and it just shows now pro-lifers have to. Well, what is difficult? I think what's difficult here, Michael, is that the overturning of Roe v. Wade has exposed the pro-life movement is weaker than they thought they were because there was a
Mhm.
large number of people who said they were pro-life because that was fashionable. That's what you say at church, but they never had to be held to the fire to say, oh, okay. And to say you're pro-life, but abortion's legal under Roe. Nothing's going to really change that. You don't have to be held accountable. To say, all right, now go and vote to make this legal or illegal. And you have people that were pro-life in word, but not in deed. And they're sifted by this. And so the number of committed pro-lifers is much lower, actually. So we realize, oh, we've got some work to do. It's similar when the church has been persecuted throughout history. You'll have a lot of people who say they're Christian, and even today, people who say they're Christian, when you are put to the test, you see who is only nominally Christian and who actually is a true believer.
So I want to get your reaction to the news of I think France has been called the eldest daughter of the church. I mean, certainly at this point it's a post-Catholic country,
Yeah.
but let's talk about France enshrining abortion rights into its constitution. Your reaction?
Ugh. Well, it's really unfortunate because for a long time, I would say that the United States had a radical policy under Roe, all 50, all 9 months for any reason. Whereas in France and other Western European countries, typically abortion was illegal after like 12 weeks or after 16 weeks, usually after 12 weeks. So abortion was more limited in far more liberal Europe than it was here. So it's unfortunate, and I think that it is a real sign of the decline of Europe, especially Western Europe. You have you have the church really dying there, and the gates of hell will not prevail against the church, but that doesn't mean in every region. Like, I mean, we used to have a Catholic stronghold in Turkey. I mean, think about Antioch, Antiochian Christians. Now you can barely find any Catholics there, any Christians there. So the same fate may behold the church in parts of Europe, especially like you have in Germany, for example, that the German Catholic Church, their revenues are going up even as their attendance plummets
Hmm.
because the German church is funded by the church tax.
Hmm.
That in Germany, you have to declare what religion you belong to, and part of your taxes go to the church. So the
Hmm.
church doesn't have an incentive to want to keep people attending because they'll just keep getting more money. It's a
Hmm.
perverse incentive there. Perverse for a lot of reasons, what the Germans are doing, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think something similar, this encroaching secular liberal humanism in Europe and in France, nothing's impossible for God. So I think we have to pray. I've been emailing with a young man who is a very great French pro-life apologist, doing great work there. We need to really encourage the apologists in many of these other countries, especially in Europe, to be the Davids against these Goliaths, and just
Hmm.
to keep at it when we, hey, look, abortion was a constitutional right under Roe here in the US, and we had to fight that for 50 years to make the progress we're at now. They may have a long fight ahead as well.
Hey, friends, do you want others to discover why the Catholic Church is the church that Jesus established? And do you want to help people make sense of all the confusion in the Catholic Church today? Help contribute to this mission by supporting Reason and Theology at patreon.com/Reason and Theology. By doing so, you'll also get access to exclusive content for patrons only. Also, if you want to deepen your faith, there are free ebooks and even courses that you can sign up for by visiting reason.podia.com. Are you a Catholic thinking about converting to Eastern Orthodoxy? Or are you a Protestant discerning whether or not to become Catholic or Eastern Orthodox? If so, I have the book just for you. It's called Answering Orthodoxy, and engages all of the arguments that Eastern Orthodox use against the Catholic Church. I respond to all of them. I show that they are in error, and in fact, they're inconsistent, because the things that Orthodox are objecting to are in fact found in their own tradition. So the fullness of the faith can only be found in the Catholic Church. Check out the book right now at shop.catholic.com for your copy today. Are you confused about how Catholic teaching authority works? With encyclicals, papal bulls, councils, and many other things, it's easy to get confused on what is authoritative and what is not. Fortunately, at MaximusInstitute.com, I have prepared a course explaining the magisterium from A to Z. Visit the website and check out the course Understanding the Magisterium for more information.